She can walk, the boy said quietly. Your fiancée won't let her. Robert Harrison froze, his hands tightening on the handles of the wheelchair. The world around him, the trees, the lake, the chatter of people in Riverside Park, suddenly went silent. He looked from the boy's serious face to the little girl sitting in the chair, Emma, his fiancée's daughter. And in that single moment, everything he thought he knew about his life began to crack. To understand how Robert ended up there, you have to go back a few months. It was a crisp autumn Sunday, the kind of day that made the oak trees in Riverside Park look like they were on fire, their leaves glowing gold and red in the soft sun. This had become Robert's favorite time of the week. Robert Harrison, a self-made millionaire and successful investment banker in his late 30s, slowly pushed a small wheelchair along the path. In it sat 9-year-old Emma, his fiancée Catherine's daughter. They had only been in his life for 6 months, but somehow, they already felt like the family he'd always wanted. Emma was dressed in a spotless white dress with a Peter Pan collar that Catherine had picked out that morning. Her light brown hair was pulled back into a neat ponytail. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, as if afraid to take up too much space. Robert glanced down at her. She was such a beautiful child. But her eyes were always tired, always sad. It was a kind of sadness that had no place on the face of a 9-year-old. Beautiful day, isn't it, Emma? Robert asked, his voice warm, gentle. Yes, Robert, she whispered, barely audible. She never called him Dad. Catherine insisted it was too soon. Robert didn't push it. He told himself he had time. They were getting married in a few months. Emma would come around. They rounded a bend in the path, and that was when they saw him. A boy stood in the middle of the walkway, blocking their path. He looked about 10. He had dark skin, short-cropped hair, and wore a faded brown t-shirt that was at least 2 sizes too big. His sneakers were scuffed and splitting at the seams. His clothes looked tired. His eyes looked older than they should. Robert automatically shifted the wheelchair a little to the side. Excuse me, buddy, he said politely. We'll just go around you, all right? But the boy didn't move. He was staring at Emma. Not with curiosity, not with pity, but with something else. A strange mix of worry and determination. Then he lifted his hand and pointed straight at her. She can walk, he said. The words dropped like a stone. Robert blinked. He thought he must have misheard. I'm sorry, he asked. What did you say? The boy didn't flinch. She can walk, he repeated, his voice steady. Your fiancé won't let her. Robert's heart lurched. He looked down at Emma. Her face had gone completely pale. Her fingers were digging into the armrest of the wheelchair so hard her knuckles turned white. Son, Robert said carefully, trying to keep his tone calm, reasonable. That's a very serious thing to say. Emma's been in this wheelchair since I met her. She was hurt in an accident. The boy shook his head. No accident, he said firmly. I live near here. I see things. He glanced at Emma again, then back at Robert, as if measuring whether this man could handle the truth. 3 weeks ago, the boy continued, I saw her by the pond. She was walking. Actually, she was running. His voice softened. She was skipping stones and laughing. She looked happy. Not like, he nodded toward the chair, not like this. Robert stared at him, stunned. No, that wasn't possible. Catherine had shown him everything. Thick stacks of medical reports, MRI scans, notes from neurologists. He had gone with them to appointments. They had toured a special school that promised to care for children with mobility issues. He knew the story by heart. The tragic accident, the grieving widow, the disabled child. Yet somewhere deep inside, a small, unwelcome thought whispered, have you ever actually seen her try to stand? He suddenly remembered the disability payments Catherine received every month for Emma's care. He remembered the life insurance payout from Emma's father's death. Money, Catherine said, was locked away in trust only for Emma's treatments and needs. Emma, Robert said softly. His voice sounded strange in his own ears. He crouched down until he was eye level with her. He'd done this 1,000 times before, always trying to draw her out, always trying to reach past the quiet wall she'd built. But this time was different. Sweetheart, he said, his heart pounding. Look at me. She lifted her eyes to his. They were full of fear. Is what he's saying true? Can you walk? Tears sprang up immediately. I'm not supposed to say, Emma whispered. Mama said something bad will happen if I tell. She said, we need the money. She said Daddy would want us to be taken care of. Her small shoulders began to shake. She was shaking not from cold, but from the weight of a secret she never should have been made to carry. Robert felt like someone had punched him. He reached out and gently took her hand. Emma, he said, his voice breaking a little. Nothing bad is going to happen because you tell the truth. You're safe with me. I promise. The boy stepped closer now, hesitating before he spoke. I'm Marcus, he said quietly. I didn't want to get anyone in trouble, but I kept seeing her in that chair, and it was wrong. Today, when I saw you with her, you just looked like someone who might listen. He swallowed hard, like someone who might help her. Robert stared at this boy, this child, really standing there in worn-out clothes but braver than most adults he knew. "Marcus," Robert said. "Thank you. You did the right thing. The very right thing." He stood up, pulled his phone from his pocket, and walked a few steps away. Though his eyes never left Emma, he called his attorney first, then Child Protective Services. With each digit he pressed, the reality of what was happening sank deeper into his bones. When he finished the calls, he went back to Emma and knelt again. "Emma," he said gently, "I'm going to ask you something very important. I need you to be really, really honest with me. Can you do that?" She was openly crying now, but she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "All right," Robert said, steadying his own breathing. "Can you stand up from this wheelchair?" Silence. Emma looked at Marcus. He gave her a small, encouraging nod. No pressure, just support. Then she looked back at Robert. "Will you still love Mama if I do?" she asked. Robert felt his throat close up. This little girl had been choosing between love and freedom, between loyalty and truth, and she'd been doing it all alone. He blinked back tears. "Emma," he said softly, "I don't know what's going to happen to your mother yet, but I know this. I will make sure you are safe and taken care of, no matter what. Right now, the most important thing in the world is the truth. Can you stand up?" She took a shaky breath. Her small hands moved from gripping the armrests to pressing down on them. Slowly, with clear hesitation, not from pain, but from fear, she began to lift herself. First, she rose a few inches. Then steadily she straightened. In a matter of seconds, she was standing, fully, on her own two legs. Robert's vision blurred. Not because she was struggling, but because she wasn't. Her legs were steady, weak from pretending, maybe, but strong enough to hold her. Emma covered her face with her hands and sobbed. "I'm sorry," she cried. "I'm so sorry. Mama said we needed the money for our house and for my school and for everything. She said it wasn't really lying because Daddy's accident left us with nothing, and this was just making things fair." Robert pulled her into his arms and held her. She was small and breakable, and shaking like a leaf. "You have nothing to be sorry for, sweetheart," he whispered into her hair. "Nothing. You were just trying to be a good daughter. What your mother asked you to do, that was wrong. That wasn't fair to you." Nearby, Marcus wiped at his own eyes, pretending he had something in them. The days that followed were ugly. There were police interviews, social workers, lawyers, documents pulled, records checked, hospital visits confirmed, or rather, disproved. The truth came out fast. There had never been an accident. And the Bowen, an accident. No drunk driver. No shattered spine. After Emma's father died in a work-related accident, Catherine had received a payout. But it wasn't enough for the life she believed they deserved. The disability scheme, the sympathy, the manipulated photos, and forged reports, it had all been her idea. Fraud, manipulation, child endangerment. Catherine was arrested. She screamed, cried, begged, blamed everyone but herself. For a moment, face to face at the station, she even turned to Robert. "You don't understand," she sobbed. "I did this for Emma, for us, for our future." But Robert just looked at her, hollow and tired. "You did this to Emma," he said quietly. "Not for her." Emma was placed with Robert's older sister, Margaret, while the court sorted through custody and legal details. Margaret had a big, warm house that always smelled like cookies and spaghetti sauce, and two kids of her own who quickly decided Emma was their new favorite playmate. Robert visited every day. He watched, stunned and grateful, as Emma began to change. At first, she walked like a baby deer, stiff, hesitant, like she believed any second someone would yell at her to sit back down. But slowly, day by day, something inside her unlocked. She started to run. She started to jump. The first time Robert heard her laugh, really laugh, from deep in her belly, it nearly broke him. He realized he had never once heard that sound when she was in the wheelchair. Marcus became a regular part of their lives too. Robert learned he lived a few blocks from the park with his grandmother in a small, worn but spotless apartment. His mother worked 2 jobs, often late into the night. His grandmother did what she could, but money was always tight. Marcus spent a lot of afternoons wandering the park, watching other kids play. Watching the world, noticing things adults missed. One evening, as the sun sank low and turned the sky soft shades of pink and orange, Robert and Marcus sat side by side on a park bench, watching Emma and Margaret's kids race each other to a tree and back. "You know," Robert said after a while, "what you did that day took real courage." Marcus shrugged, looking down at his hands. "My grandma says," he answered quietly, "that if you see something wrong and don't say anything, you become part of the wrong. I didn't want to be part of hurting that little girl." Robert looked at him. Really looked at him. The worn shoes, the too big shirt, the watchful eyes. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. "Marcus," he said, holding it out, "this is my card. My company runs scholarship programs and community support projects. I want you to keep this, and I want you to promise me something." Marcus frowned slightly. "What?" I want you to promise that if you or your family ever need help, you'll call me. And when the time comes for you to think about college, I want you to call me then, too. We'll talk about making sure money is never the reason you can't go." Marcus's eyes widened. "For real?" he asked, suspicion and hope fighting on his face. "For real," Robert said firmly. "You changed 2 lives that day in the park, Emma's and mine. That kind of courage is rare. And when I see something rare, I invest in it." Marcus stared at the card like it was made of gold. "Okay," he said quietly. "I promise." 6 months later, spring had returned to Riverside Park. The oak trees were green again. Birds chattered in the branches. The air felt softer, kinder. Robert sat on the same bench where he'd once stood frozen as a poor boy told him the truth he didn't want to hear. Now he watched Emma fly. She was on the swings, pumping her legs as hard as she could, going higher and higher, her hair whipping in the wind. Margaret's children were beside her, shouting and laughing. Marcus was behind Emma, pushing her gently, careful not to overdo it, but smiling each time she squealed, "Higher, Marcus, higher." Robert leaned back, his chest filling with something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. So much had changed. His wedding to Catherine, the life he thought he'd have. That was gone, and in a strange way, he was grateful. He'd been a heartbeat away from tying his life to a lie. Emma was in therapy now, working through the betrayal, the confusion, the guilt that wasn't hers. It was a long road, but she was strong, resilient, surrounded by people who loved her for who she was, not for what she could pretend to be. Robert had started the adoption process. He couldn't imagine his life without her anymore. As for Catherine, she was serving time. Part of her sentence included mandatory counseling. Robert didn't hate her. He was past that. Mostly, he just hoped that one day she would understand the damage she had done, not just with the fraud, but with the way she'd chained her own daughter to a lie. He hoped she would accept the help she was being given, and maybe, someday find a way back to herself. "Robert," Emma ran over to him now, cheeks flushed, eyes sparkling. "Did you see how high I was swinging?" she asked breathlessly. "I did," he said, pulling her into a warm hug. "You were flying, sweetheart." "I love being able to run and play," she said, almost bouncing in place. She glanced over at Marcus, who was now sitting on a bench with a workbook open, quietly doing his homework. "Thank you for believing me," she added. "And thank you for helping me tell the truth." Robert followed her gaze. "We should all thank Marcus," he said. "He's the real hero of this story." Emma nodded solemnly, then darted off again, already halfway back to the swings before he could say another word. The sun began to set, casting the park in a golden glow that made everything look softer, almost magical. Robert sat there, watching children play, listening to their laughter ring out across the grass, and he understood something he'd spent years chasing the wrong way. True wealth wasn't his bank account. It wasn't his cars, his suits, his skyscraper office. True wealth was this: the courage of a 10-year-old boy in worn sneakers who chose to speak up, the freedom of a little girl who finally stood on her own 2 feet, the chance to build a life based on truth instead of pretense. Sometimes, wisdom doesn't come from boardrooms, or degrees, or shiny success. Sometimes it comes from a kid in a faded t-shirt who refuses to look away when something feels wrong. And that, Robert thought, as he watched Marcus look up and wave at him shyly, was the kind of story worth telling. This story was brought to you by Kindness Valley, where every act of courage, no matter how small, has the power to change a life.